term Pinger meta is an important concept for Pauper Commander. Pinger refers to something like Spear Spewer that deals damage to each opponent repeatedly, and meta refers to popular strategies within a playgroup. The most popular pingers are in red and have a triggered ability, so they're not limited to once per turn like Spear Spewer. They're all slightly different, but to summarize, there are 4 that trigger from instants and sorceries like Thermo Alchemist, Unruly Catapult, Erebor Flamesmith, and Gutter Snipe, plus 2 that trigger from non-creature spells, Firebrand Archer and Kessig Flamebreather. They're all slightly different, but most of them cost 2 mana. That's incredibly efficient for the amount of damage these can put out. They all deal damage to each opponent, so one trigger can be 3 damage. That can put up some huge numbers for total damage dealt, but it's not directed like a combat-focused strategy. If an aggro deck is scared of a particular player, they can focus their damage by just attacking the one player. By comparison, a Pinger deck will probably do more damage overall, but can't focus particularly problematic opponents. So Pinger decks need more control to compensate. That's not a problem though. Pingers asking deck builders to play cheap non-creature spells pushes them into blue anyway. The pingers only costing 2 allows them to be played while leaving plenty of mana open. Many of the pingers also have a toughness of 3. That means burn and control go hand in hand in Pauper Commander in a very synergistic way. Giving up the benefit of focusing damage like an aggro deck can feel like a big loss, but it actually puts the aggro player in a worse position most of the time, because to the defending player, a pinger deck doesn't deal 3 damage per trigger, it deals 1. A 3-power creature, however, always represents 3 damage, so it gets removed first. That makes pingers a lower priority threat than almost any creature that attacks, which means that the pinger control deck gets to save their protection and get additional value off of their pingers. If an aggro deck and a pinger deck are in the same pod, they both win by dealing damage, so they can work together to knock out fast combo decks. This gives aggro decks an ally to start the game, which they need because they struggle to beat combo, which has been dominant. Playing a strategy that wins by attacking with creatures like aggro just takes up a lot of deck slots that doesn't really leave a lot of room for draw and removal. After the pinger and the aggro deck work together to kill the combo deck probably used every last resource they had to stop the aggro deck, and then the aggro deck has to beat the pinger deck. That pinger deck has been taking a back seat and building up resources this whole time, so that demands quite a bit of resiliency from the aggro deck, which is another reason that aggro doesn't get to spend a lot of deck slots on removal. If the aggro deck instead chooses to kill the pinger deck first, there won't be any removal anymore if someone tries to combo. Unfortunately, this happens often because pinger decks will be at the highest life total after pinging everyone else, and many players make their decision to who attack by who has the highest life total. Combo decks also have poor defenses, and a lot of the time aggro decks prefer to attack who might become unattackable while they still can. Comparing pingers to aggro in another way, not having to choose to attack removes a very difficult decision. In fact, if there's a high-threat turbo combo deck and there's 2 pinger decks instead of a pinger deck and an aggro deck, the combo player always dies first because they take damage from both of the pinger decks, while each pinger deck is usually excluded from the damage they're dealing. I know I'm only using 3 people in my scenario here, but the same logic holds up if it's 2 combo decks and 2 pinger decks. I'm not saying that people should stop playing aggro, pingers just get cruise control for threat priority, in terms of dealing damage at least. Aggro is often considered the simpler strategy. I think that's true for deck building, but it's one of the most difficult strategies in-game to make decisions for. Pinger strategies have some annoying incentives of their own though. For example, if there's something that gains life repeatedly like a creature with lifelink, it's better to kill it before it can gain that life. It doesn't take much to outpace the damage of a pinger deck unless it's really set up. That's incredibly important to acknowledge when building any deck in the pinger meta. The more repeatable life gain creatures pinger decks have to remove, the less equipped they'll be to stop a combo. That's something that pinger decks can control by leaving the life gain creature alive. It's a matter of threat priority and it's easy to misjudge. For me, the most difficult thing to learn about playing a control deck in any format is knowing which threats to let live, but playing a pinger deck still gives the pilot a choice in those situations. Another thing to consider is that allowing life gain creatures to live can make a pinger deck a non-threat in an opponent's mind, which can be used to eliminate the other 2 players and get into a 1v1, at which point the life gain creature can still be removed, or powered through if needed. To power through a life gainer, multiple pingers can be played at the same time to race the repeatable source of life gain. Most of the pingers having 3 toughness and not dying to sweepers means it's not hard to build up multiple. The pinger strategy works completely out of the 99, so the commander of a pinger deck can be a lightning rod to soak up additional removal. But what do the commanders of the strongest pinger strategies look like? Third Path Iconoclast is one of the most dominant options because its ability turns non-creature spells into artifact creatures, so pingers can be included that trigger from creatures like Impact Tremors, Witty Roastmaster, or Molten Gatekeeper, or with artifacts like Reckless Fireweaver, Ingenious Artillerist, or Sunshot Militia. There isn't the same critical mass of cards that trigger from artifacts or creatures, but putting them all together brings the deck up to 11 as of this video without having to dip into things like Spear Spewer that can only be activated once per turn. Malcolm Kedis is another dominant pinger deck, but it really takes the gloves off and shows off that pingers can be the payoff for combo. Malcolm triggers whenever an opponent is dealt damage by any pirate the Malcolm player controls, so if the deck can turn a pinger into a pirate, that's 3 treasures per ping. If it's something that triggers when Artifact comes into play, that's infinite. It also plays Ophidian Eye and Tandem Lookout to draw tons of cards. When I've seen this assembled, they may only draw 3 or 6 cards the turn it comes together, but the following turn, it's unstoppable. While they're setting this up, Kedis turns the damage from Malcolm into damage to everyone, which both strategically works like the other pingers and creates 3 treasures each turn. This pinger deck takes the strategy from a low priority threat to an instant arc enemy though, at least to me. It can be better to fly under the radar. Loyal Apprentice and Lorehold Apprentice are 2 other pinger decks that have both won tournaments. Like Third Path Iconoclast, Loyal Apprentice gets to play both the creature and artifact pingers because of the artifact creatures it produces. The extra bodies insulate from edicts, which is one of the most common ways pingers die. Malcolm Kedis usually solves this problem by sacrificing Kedis. Kedis still grants Malcolm the ability if it has summoning sickness, the treasures help refund the expended resources, and it's a repeatable way to get a creature back to negate future edicts. That means that the occasional edict won't have much of an impact. A critical mass of removal is required to out-tempo a pinger deck. Board wipes like Pestilence and Evankar's Justice help with that by removing edict fodder and can serve as a great transition into black pingers. After concentrating on the red pingers, a natural conclusion by many players is to next level the meta by playing black drain effects and pingers. But there is a cost for this. In terms of damage potential, the black pingers and drain effects aren't as mana efficient. Creeping Bloodsucker is considered a top tier drain creature. Spear's Fury does just as much damage as this, but Creeping Bloodsucker gains up to 3 life per turn. Extort is repeatable, but again, the rate is poor. Basilica's creature is the cheapest extorter at 2 mana, so it's 3 mana to get the first extort activation. Compared to Kessig Flamebreather, Basilica's creature has the added benefit of working with everything, but if you add the casting cost and the extort cost, it quickly costs double or triple the flat cost of Kessig Flamebreather. The difference in efficiency also becomes more apparent with multiple in play. Paying 2 or 3 extra per spell slows any deck down to a crawl. In mono black, the only other option is Syndicate Enforcer, which is 4 mana, so it's more to play than any of the red pingers. Expanding the search to white gives more 2-cost extorters with Syndic of Tithes and Tithe Drinker. Kingpin's Pet and Basilica Guards are the last 2. They both cost 3. Kingpin's Pet at least flies, but Basilica Guard's major claim to fame is 4 toughness, which highlights that none of the other extorters have more than 2 toughness. Conversely, about half of the red pingers have 3 toughness or higher. Even though they're fragile, black has recursion and other ways of solving these problems, but my point is that the major selling point of these must be the life gain, because it clearly loses in terms of speed. Against opposing pingers, the life gain can have the desired effect of overpowering their burn, but I've mentioned how red pinger decks leave ample room for interaction and counterspells, and negating their win condition is not something they usually take sitting down. In many games I've heard players try to defend their life gain creatures and to save the removal for combo, but it's a hard sell. In my opinion, this means that players struggling to beat combo should take repeatable life gain out of their decks. One-time effects don't have as much of that problem. The Raided Scorpion, Okiba Reckoner Raid, and Grey Merchant of Asphodel are only efficiently stopped by counterspell. It can be difficult to get enough damage to win with one-time effects to be lethal, but there's a lot of landmines here. The Grave Flickers reintroduce the problem of giving opposing pinger decks the opportunity and incentive to expend their interaction, preventing the life gain. Recursion that returns the drained creatures from graveyard to hand or play at least steers clear of opposing removal, but can incentivize opposing graveyard hate, which is far less common. There aren't that many drain effects though. Not every effect in the deck has to gain life, which is where powerhouses like Pestilence and Crypt Rats come in. I count these as finishers, and like all finishers, the table will try to stop it. With Crypt Rats, that means killing the rat if something would give it life gain or keep it alive through its own ability. With Pestilence, that means player removal, or reducing the Pestilence player's life total so low that they can't use it, which is usually the same as killing them, so it shouldn't be played too early, and its controller either needs to win quickly or get rid of it to lose table aggro. Crushing Disappointment and Evankar's Justice add to this as other spells that contribute to the pinger main plan without really looking like a pinger. They're particularly great because they do something, like killing creatures or drawing cards, while contributing to damage. Tattered Mummy and Soul Cage Fiend add to the suite of one-off creatures that deal damage, and the disposable bodies are great. Even with all of the one-off drain cards, the one-off damage-only cards, and those finishers, it can still be difficult to close out a game without the help of other pinger decks, so the repeatable drain creatures are still played often. There's a lot of wiggle room there, and some strategies will want different effects a lot of the time. That's actually great, because it leaves deck building wide open. By comparison, the red pingers push a deck so far into the Spellslinger strategy that those decks end up looking very similar. One obvious solution for having a consistent win condition is to put it in the command zone. Abdel, Agent of the Iron Throne, creates a horde of bodies that trigger the background. Being a token strategy, it can also play Mirkwood Bats and Nadir's Nightblade. Turning a Cloud Shift into double-digit damage that refunds mana and draws cards is too many things. It forces the table to either stop everything it does, or lose. Again, not everyone wants to be Archenemy. Another option is Sir Conrad, which has a high damage potential but suffers from being expensive. Black doesn't have strong ways to protect its commanders compared to blue, with its generically good counterspells, so it ends up being a bit fragile. Mayhem Devil, Elasil Core, and Vizkopa Guildmage represent commanders that ask the deck to do something more specific, which also means that it can be saved up and done all at once. For example, if Elasil Core is in play with a free sack outlet like Carrion Feeder and 5 creatures, if another player drops below 6 life, they're at the mercy of the Elasil Core player. To avoid this, players will interact with Elasil Core before it can get enough creatures into play. That's something that the red pingers do well, because the number of instants and sorceries in hand is hidden information. An opponent can cross the threshold of lethal damage without knowing it more easily, especially if one of the spells triggering the pingers is a burn spell pointed at someone's face. That can easily be 5 damage at instant speed. It's true that in Elasil Core it's possible to flash in some tokens or hold on to a payoff like Falconwrath Noble, but it takes major effort. To me, all of this is encapsulated in the term pinger meta. The way pinger decks can hide behind aggro decks, how life gain affects target priority, and how non-damage based strategies like combo are naturally eliminated first with multiple pinger decks. So this seems like a good time to recap key aspects of every pinger deck that can be controlled to some degree. How much room is left for interaction and draw? The number of pingers, for redundancy in case one is destroyed, or to stack up and close out a game. The rate? Cheaper pingers and higher damage leaves more mana and deck slots for other things. If a deck can trigger its pingers more often, it can do more with less. Life gain, which can tax the removal of opposing pinger decks but can also next level a pinger heavy meta. Burst damage, to close the door when the opportunity presents itself. Hidden information, so that opponents don't have time to engineer a solution. The extreme end of this is closer to combo. And possuming, by which I mean the deck's ability to avoid looking like a threat, to avoid getting attacked or having its threats removed. No deck can excel at everything. Adding more of one thing can subtract from the others, and it's easy to misstep. Each aspect also varies in value based on who and what it's playing against. Pingers are a strong strategy that deals a huge amount of damage in a compact way in terms of deck space, and viewing the format from the perspective of a pinger deck explains many common incentives in a Pauper Commander game that must be understood for proper threat assessment. Leave a comment down below if you think I've missed anything. Where do you think Suture Priest fits into all of this? How about Spitfire Lagak or Disciple of the Vault? For more information about this format, check out the rest of my channel. I use all of my Patreon money plus some out of my own pocket to run this channel and promote this format. To contribute, give this video a like and subscribe for more Pauper Commander content. If you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, I'd love it if you became a patron. Patreon shoutout to Achu, I've Cryptid, and Bill, Too Much Do. Thank you.